I want you to know I slaved over this PowerPoint for 4 hours. I kept trying to insert pictures and they float off again. And I misspelled a very bad word. I made a bad word. I was going to leave it up for you, but Michael insisted it be taken down. He had no faith in you guys. Okay, before we get started, let's do a few house cleaning items. The first one is the restroom. We do go for, right through the program. We don't take a break. So if you need them, just go out, back up the way you came down the stairs and go to your left. And their restrooms are right there. Exit doors. So we have this one right here. Or you can go back up and out the door that you came in, the main door. All right? And my name is Kathy Bartos, and I'm one of the 5 members of Sierra Nevada Forums. We are not incorporated, we're not non-profit, we're not anything except people who just sit around and drink coffee and come up with these things. And anyway, I think we're doing pretty well. And this group here was asked to come back. They filled this place to the brim last time they were here, and they did the animals over the big, fluffy, cuddly ones, the big, like the bears and the deer and the cougars, the things people want to snuggle because they're so cute. But now we're going to learn what those animals do when winter comes. And it'll be a broader perspective in terms of different animals. But at the end of this, when we do our question and answer period, we will take questions on any animal you want to ask them about. And I dare you to stump them because they are really good at what they do. And I doubt you can do it. But I would encourage you to try. I would like to now click on my PowerPoint. You can go, ooh and oh, look how good she did. Okay, all of a sudden I feel so validated. I don't have to go to my therapist this week. Okay, so Tricia is, raise your hand. There she is. Now you all were supposed to read this before I came in. That was your assignment. Jessica? Jessica, right there. Now I'd like to click to, okay, come on. How do I do that? Oh, wait. Oh, I got it in here? Oh, I got it. I want to say thank you to our sponsors. We have Nevada Humanities, Sun King Window Tinting, League of Women Voters, Loomis and Associates, Partnership Carson City, and my poor husband, Bartos Construction Inc. You know there were some dealings going on getting that. There were some concessions were made. All right. That's what he said. And I said, honey, it's not the 3rd Friday. Okay. So, I've already told you can ask any questions you want of these gals. Please do take advantage of that. And I know I'm making a light, but I do have one somber moment here. And that is, we were at one time with Sierra Nevada Forums, 6 of us. And one of our members, who was a founding member, Donna Curtis, did pass away rather suddenly and unexpectedly. And this was her idea. This wilderness, the wildlife programs were the ones that she really believed in and wanted us to see. And I believe that she was absolutely right. So Donna, wherever you are, here we are, and thank you. So that's all I have for you in the way of newsy items. We do have one more thing I want to show you. Donations. So if you are inclined to give us a couple nickels, a couple dimes, $1 or $2, we would appreciate it. It really does help us with the costs of this forum. We pay for this. We get a real good rate on this room here, and we do have other supplies and things that we need to do. So thank you very much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I think you guys are going to really enjoy what these ladies have to oh, look at that. Ladies have to share with you. So we're going to start with Jessica, correct? Okay, come on up. And here's your clicker. So Jeff, you're going to bring her up? Oh, yeah. That's dangerous. Do you want these? Yeah.
That's not me. Well, in the meantime, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. So yes, I'm Jessica Heitt, and I am the Urban Wildlife Educator for the Department of Wildlife. So what that means is we get a lot of incoming calls and questions from people that have issues or concerns with wildlife. So my whole job is just to teach people about living with wildlife and how to reduce negative interactions and whatnot. So I get calls on everything from mice to mountain lions and everything in between, and some pretty funny calls comes in sometimes too. So we'll just be talking tonight a little bit about what exactly wildlife does during the winter and how they can survive the pretty tough winters. Thank you. It's off, that's why. There we go. Okay. So why exactly is winter so hard? So not only are there bitterly cold temperatures that are just miserable, but there's a lot of other issues that animals face as well. So winter means that there's not a whole lot of food available, so it's either died off or dried up for the year or sometimes covered by snow. It means that there's no water available, and yes, they are surrounded by snow, which is technically a form of water, but it's not really in a form that they can use. So there's not a whole lot of water available, it's often frozen. And then there's also not a lot of places for them to hide, so their cover is pretty difficult as well too. Anytime there's that really awful wind, they could normally, hunker down in a tree or under a bush, and all of these things have, for the most part, lost their leaves, and they're just out there sticking it out through winter as well. And so there's just a lot of reasons that winter is hard on animals, so they just don't have access to this food, water, or shelter. And so there's typically 3 main strategies that animals will use to be able to make it through these tough times. So animals can either hibernate, migrate, or adapt. So if they hibernate, they are just going to sleep through it all, which is, in my opinion, the best strategy. They can migrate, so they just go somewhere else, wherever maybe it happens to be warmer, but definitely where there's food or water available. Or they can adapt, so they've got some strategy that they can be able to deal with it in one way or another. So I'm going to be speaking... Oh, I broke it. Uh-oh. I did. I'm going backwards. What happened? Yeah, did I kick something? I don't think so either. So I'll just keep going. So I was going to be speaking about hibernation tonight. So hibernation is just, like most people know, it's just a way for animals to, in one way or another, sleep through the winter. And that can look a lot different based on the animal that is hibernating. So there's different types of hibernation. But no matter what, an animal needs to prepare for hibernation in one way or another. So first we'll be talking about rodents. So rodents are what we consider to be true hibernators. So this is chipmunks or squirrels or marmots are a really good true hibernator. And so in order for them to prepare for hibernation, first they start scurrying around and they are trying to gather as many seeds and acorns and whatever food that they can find. So for a couple weeks leading up to their hibernation, that's a big part of what they're doing, is they're just trying to find food that they can bring back to their den with them, that they can live off of all winter long. They're also going to fatten up as much as they can, but their little bodies can't fit a whole lot of weight, and they'll get a little bit fluffier as well to keep them nice and warm. But then they will start building their hibernation den. So their hibernation den will look a little bit different based on what species it is. It can change how many entrances they have, how deep it is, where the entrances face. So there's a couple different things that will change based on that. But no matter what, you go in, and they will have a nice little nest. They will have gathered hay and grasses and straw and all kinds of nice warm things and built themselves a nice little rodent nest. So they'll have their main nest, their bedroom, basically, where they're going to be sleeping most of the time. Beyond that, they will also have a whole separate room for their toilet. So they can wake up and they can go and wander into that room, use the bathroom, so it's all separate, nothing's getting cross-contaminated. And then they've also been storing all of that food that they've been gathering in various places as well. So they've got a whole kitchen in addition to their bedroom and the bathroom. So they've really got a whole underground condo going on. What the rodents actually do in hibernation is they will wake up every couple of days. So when they go into sleep, it is an incredibly deep sleep. They are basically dead to the world, for lack of a better term. They will wake up to eat, urinate, and whatnot. But in the meantime, they are... yes, so we've got gathering his snacks, getting nice and chubby and fluffy, and gathering hay for his bed. This is a typical den. So we've got the nest here, the bathroom over here, and then we've got food throughout. So what their body functions look like. So their temperatures will drop pretty drastically. So their body temperature will drop to less than half of what it normally is. Their pulse is basically undetectable. So they are super cold. They're like little rodent popsicles at this time. And they are basically impossible to wake up when they're in their hibernation. So this is called true hibernation. In order for the rodents to wake up from this, they have something special called brown fat. So brown fat is something that only these true hibernators possess, and it's one of a couple different reasons that sadly humans can't hibernate, is because we don't possess this brown fat. So the way brown fat works is it has extra mitochondria, which are basically the powerhouse of the cell. And so these extra mitochondria allow this type of fat to get really hot in a very short amount of time. So it's actually burning the white fat and providing lots of heat to the animal. So when they need to wake up from this hibernation, this is when the brown fat kicks into drive, and it starts burning that white fat, getting them really warm, and it's centered around the spinal column and then on their organs as well. So it can wake them back up in a super fast amount of time. Humans only possess brown fat when they are infants. So as an infant, it's a lot warmer where you came from than it is out in the world. And so they need a little bit of this brown fat to keep them from going into hypothermia after they've been born. So they will burn off this brown fat pretty quickly at the beginning of their life, and then we don't really ever get it again. So this is something that only these rodents possess, and it's what will help wake their deep, deep sleep. I don't think the clicker doesn't like it. Will you change the slide, please? I think the clicker freaks it out. Yeah. So next is bears. So bears are what we typically think of as the poster child for hibernation, but in all reality, bears do it completely different than most other animals. So in order for bears to prepare for hibernation, first they go through something called hyperphagia, and that just means that they're eating a lot. So in order to get ready for hibernation, they are just eating as much as they possibly can because they're trying to put as much weight on their body as they can. So unlike a rodent that's so small it can't pack on all that weight, it has to hide it in its den, the bear just carries it all on its body. And one of the most miraculous things about bears, another reason humans can't hibernate, is because they seem to have no physiological side effects from this. They can put on up to 25 pounds a week, and there are no negative health consequences for doing that. So during this time, they're foraging for food up to 23 hours a day. Their main purpose in life is to just find as much food as they possibly can. And they can eat up to 20,000 calories a day during this time. And that's really hard to do. If you look at it, especially from a bear's perspective, if you're eating strictly bear food, That's 20,000 calories is 2.2 million termites. That takes a lot of termites to get to 20,000 calories. But if you look at it from human sources of food, that's only 66 cheeseburgers. And that's pretty sad. So during this time is really when we start seeing the most conflicts with humans and bears, because they will start coming down into urban areas looking for human sources of food because we provide so much and it has really good high caloric value. So they have to put in way less effort to get way more fat. Additionally, at this time, it's typically during fall that this is happening, and that's when our fruit trees are ripening up. So fruit trees are a big driving factor for bears during the fall. But once they've gotten good and fat, then they can go ahead and enter their hibernation. So where exactly do bears hibernate? Will you change the slide, please? I know, but I think this is making it mad. So whenever we think of bears hibernating, it's always in some sort of cave, and you know, he looks nice and cozy and he's got all this space around him and maybe a little fire in there. But really that's not a very accurate description of where bears hibernate. So they want the smallest space that they can possibly fit their bodies into. The bigger the space, the more energy they have to use to heat it up. So this is really what a typical bear hibernation den would look like. It's just a fallen over tree that's dead that they have carved out the inside so that they can just fit their body in there. So just like a rodent, they will actually go and gather all sorts of hay and whatnot to put in there. So it's nice and cozy, it's a nice little bear home, but it's just, they just need a very small space. Look, it's so cute, and got his nest. And a lot of the times they have to make these. It's not necessarily something that's already there. So you can actually see the claw marks up here from where he's been carving out his little bear hibernation nest. So the body functions of a bear are quite different compared to a rodent. So bears really don't enter true hibernation. You can definitely wake them up if they're hibernating. And their body temperature, whereas a rodent drops substantially, it's going to stay pretty consistent. It'll drop a little bit so that they're burning less calories, but it's still going to be pretty close to a normal range. They will not go to the bathroom whatsoever, and for the most part won't wake up to eat. If it's a really warm day, or sometimes they will come out and find human sources of food, but for the most part they really don't eat during hibernation. But they can definitely wake up and come out and wander around. And they will do something called isometric exercises, which means that they're just flexing their muscles while they're in there so that they don't lose any of their muscle mass while they're in the den for quite a few months at a time. Additionally, the female bear will also have her cubs while she's in the den. And then she will spend, the female with cubs is going to be in the den longer than anybody else because she'll be nursing the cubs until they're big enough to come out. So reptiles also do a form of hibernation, but when it comes to reptiles, we call it brumation. So they are cold-blooded, and so they really don't have an internal thermostat like mammals do. So mammals, when they're sleeping and they get too cold, it will wake them up saying that you're too cold. Reptiles don't have that, and so they are looking for some sort of already developed cave or burrow or something that they can go in, and it needs to be deep enough that they don't freeze during the winter because they don't have anything that would tell them that it's too cold, you need to go deeper. And there's not a whole lot of these things that already exist, these perfect burrows for reptiles, so that means that they are a little more tolerant of other reptiles during this time, and they will all gather in mass into these burrows. And it's sometimes a lot of one particular type of species, so this is all rattlesnakes over here. But they will also tolerate other species in there with them as well. So a lot of the times, because tortoises dig burrows, it's a tortoise burrow, and some other lizards and snakes have found their way in there. Sometimes it's an old badger hole that they've all gathered in. But so they all just hang out in there all winter. Again, their metabolic processes will decrease quite a bit so that they're not using as much energy, but they're all kind of just squished in there together. In order for them to get ready for hibernation, instead of like other animals that are stocking up on food in one way or another, they will actually stop eating altogether. So since their metabolic processes drop so much, they won't be able to metabolize that food, and so they will stop eating for weeks before they go into their brumation to make sure that they have processed all that food so that it doesn't rot in their stomachs while they're in there. In the spring, when it starts to warm up, they will all come out, and it's really convenient that when it's time to get frisky, there's a whole bunch of them in one location. Insects also do a type of hibernation, and it looks really different based on what the animal is. So I'll start in the top left. So up here we've got a whole bunch of ladybugs, and ladybugs are very similar to rodents, reptiles in how they do it, in that they will all gather in mass in just a crevice of a rock, someplace that they're safe, out of sight of predators and out of the elements, and they will just hang out in there all winter long in these big groups. And they will have to do this multiple times, so they'll typically come back to the same spot because they can live for up to 3 years. In the middle here, that is the egg sac of a praying mantis. So it's called super fun name, called an ootheca. And when the female praying mantis lays her eggs, it comes out in this sort of foamy material with hundreds of eggs in there, and then it starts to harden up until it's basically like a styrofoam case. So it's nice and hard on the outside to be able to keep all the eggs safe, and then in the spring, when it starts to warm up, they will hatch out of it and go off on their own and be their own praying mantises. And then in the upper right-hand corner is a woolly bear caterpillar. So these guys will actually dehydrate themselves so that there's no water in their body, and then they produce basically their own antifreeze. It's called a cryptoprotectant that just sucks all of the water out of them and then freezes all of their tissues solid so that no other water can get in there and freeze them. And so they are just this tiny frozen solid caterpillar all winter long. And then again, they will just kind of thaw out when spring comes. Nice and cozy right here is a queen bumblebee. And so she just burrows down all by herself into this nice little hibernation den where she just sticks out winter. And then over here on the very right is a chrysalis of a tiger swallow butterfly. So all of these insects have, some way to get through winter, and it's going to look a lot different based on what the insect is and what the easiest strategy for them to be able to get through winter is. Lastly is this little guy. It's called a porwheel. And it's a member of the nighthawk family. And it is the only known bird that we know of at this point that does any form of hibernation. And so how hibernation works for this little guy is he basically just hunkers down on the ground for weeks at a time, and again goes into that state of torpor where all of the metabolic processes, his temperature, his breathing, his heart rate, all of that drops down, and he kind of just hangs out and hopes nobody notices him because he's got some really great camouflage. And then we'll wake up every couple of days, go find some food, and then go back into this state of torpor and again hibernate for a couple weeks at a time. With that, I will pass it on to Tricia.
Okay, so yes, hibernation is a very popular strategy. It's very well loved by the animal world, but not everybody can do it. It does require some very special physical abilities that we don't all share. So the other popular strategy is to migrate. If you can't sleep through it, let's just head south, which is still a popular strategy for humans. There's a whole bunch of us that do that. It's not the biggest population, I swear. So migrating to new locations is definitely an option. But it's not always these big, long-distance migrations. So here we have a shorter distance migration. You guys might recognize the map. So that's basically the Tahoe Basin. But you can see that, oh, I have a pointer, huh? Is that the red dot? Aha, so here's Washoe Lake. And the dots are all different colored deer. These are deer that we put collars on and let them wander around for a year and figure out everywhere they went. So you figure each different colored dot is a different individual deer, but deer don't hang out by themselves. So it's sort of representative of a whole herd, which could be anywhere from like 4 to 12 deer. And in the summer, this is where they've spread out. So all up and down that Tahoe Basin, the entire stretch of the basin, they've stretched out, taken their time. There's tons of food available in the summer. There's lots of that fresh green shoots of flowers and berries ripening up, grass, all that good stuff that they're going to want to eat, those preferred shrubs. But as fall comes and winter hits in, they all kind of come to this one stretch. Right? All of them are congregating in these one area. So they're coming, they're all migrating, and we see it across the state. Whoops, they're coming from these high elevations to a lower elevation. And they're doing that for a couple of reasons. One, they want to get out of the snow. We know Tahoe gets a lot more snow than we do. They're famous for it. All the ski resorts are there for a reason. So that snow, to walk through it, is, one, impossible in some winters. It's just too deep. Or it burns that many more calories just trying to trod through the snow. And the snow's covering up their source of food. So digging through it, it just becomes very hard. So they're coming down in elevation where there's not as much snow depth. And they're coming to an elevation band where we have sagebrush and bitterbrush growing. So these are plants that stay green all year long. And so they're still going to have green leaves for those animals to eat and still get all their calories as they have to go through winter. So both the mule deers do it, so we got some mule deer, and the antelope do that as well. And to a certain extent, elk will do it a bit. They have a seasonal migration as well. So these aren't those big, long-distance migrations that we think about, but there's still a seasonal difference that we see. Now, here's more of your classic migration. Birds are going to head south for the winter. The funny part is, in a lot of our stretch of the flyway, we are south for the winter. Right? As cold as it's getting outside, we're actually the preferred destination for a lot of these birds that live up north for the rest of the year. So this one is a pintail. It actually has this long tail feather in the back that gives them a distinctive name. And you can see they spend most of the time Canada, Alaska, so they're coming down. We're part of their wintering ground. And we're going to start seeing more and more birds showing up for the winter because we are the warm spot. Right? So more classically, heading south, meaning Mexico, we've got bats. We have 23 different species of bats in Nevada. They don't all migrate. Some of them will hibernate. Some of them will migrate to hibernate. But this little guy is the Mexican free-tailed bat, so here's his little tail sticking out. Right? Most bats are going to have their tail that's still connected to the skin flap that's connected to their wing. And you'll see that in the lobby. We've got a couple examples. But this particular species, the tail sticks out, this little mouse tail, out the back. So he's this tiny little guy. They're little microbats. They're very popular because they roost in large colonies of the tens to hundreds of thousands at a time. And there's a couple caves in Nevada. There's also a couple bridges. So in Sparks, there's a bridge that goes over the Truckee River where there's tens of thousands of them every summer that come. It's a maternity roost, so they're going to come and have pups there. So the population doubles by the end of the summer. And they come out every night at dusk, just this huge flock of them come swarming out like it's the Discovery Channel. So we lead hikes. I highly recommend that you look for that and come join us to see. It's an amazing sight. But they're only there from June to September. And then they head back south to Arizona or Texas or Mexico or even further south. So they are going to be migrators in that classic sense. We also have butterflies migrating. So everybody does a little differently, right? If they're not going to be wrapped up in a chrysalis or a little frozen caterpillar, leaving town's another option. So monarch butterflies are famous for these huge migrations that they do. Typically, for the rest of the country, all the way up from Canada, they're going to follow down, and there's a secret forest in Mexico. They just gather in these huge clumps. Nevada monarchs don't do that. Right? All monarchs want to go be surfers. They're going to go to the California coast and hang out in Pacific Grove, pretty much from Southern California up through Central California. They cling to these pine trees in these big lumps. Like you would come up on this tree and not know it was a pine tree, because every pine needle is going to be covered with these huge clumps. It looks like dried leaves on some deciduous tree. It's completely deceiving. And they are actually migrating to hibernate. Once they get to their destination, they kind of clump up together and they hang out. They're not moving around. It's a butterfly. It cannot pack on that much fat, right? So they do just kind of hang out in this very cold state. And then around Valentine's Day, there's a Pacific Grove Butterfly Festival in February, because right around Valentine's Day is when they all start waking up and flying around and getting sociable with each other. And then in March, they're going to start laying their eggs. So the crazy thing about butterflies is in most animals, an individual is migrating down and migrating back. And that's part of that annual life cycle. But for butterflies, it's a newly matured butterfly at the end of the summer that migrates down, hibernates, gets up, and they lay their eggs pretty close to wherever they were hanging out. So in California, they're going to lay their eggs and then the adult dies. And that egg has to mature and go through the cycle and become a mature butterfly. And then they'll probably make it as far as like maybe the Sierras. So it actually takes like 3 generations for them to get back to Nevada. Yeah, so if you're not hibernating and you're not leaving town, your next option is just to stay here and layer up and deal with the cold. So that's our next group we're going to talk about. So it really has everything to do with that winter coat. As you all know, you have to have your winter coat. So that means a couple different things. On one hand, it means getting shaggier, layering up, bulkier, thicker, multiple layers under there. So you can see here, there's some sheep here, and this is them shedding in the spring, but it's a great example of how much extra layer they're going to grow. This extra longer outer layer, it's going to have a lot more hollow hairs for more insulation, but it's also going to be a slightly different color. So you can see how dark that brown is underneath, because in the summer, everything's a vibrant color, and in the winter, everything's kind of a dull, gray, beige, monotone sort of a landscape. And we see the animals' coats changing that way. Deer did the same thing. They're much more reddish color in the summer, and they're much more gray in the winter. So as they grow that longer coat, it's actually a different color. Same thing, we've got the mountain goat up there. I mean, he obviously is a very shaggy animal there. He definitely just stays. They don't even migrate down in elevation. These guys are true mountain animals. They're going to stay up there. They do tend to change their diet, though. So there's no grass growing up there in the winter. But what they're going to do is they hang out and let the wind sweep off the snow, and they're going to change their diet to more lichen and moss and things along those lines that's still available. Because where they live, the rock is literally steep enough that the wind or the snow can't accumulate too much on it. So it's going to fall off with this steep slope or with the wind blowing on it. And then down here, we've got one of these guys in the lobby. So this is our long-tailed weasel. This is his summer coat. Again, it's a rich brown color. It's basically a bright yellow underneath. But he changes his coat. Not only is it going to get thicker, but it's going to change to pure white. Because one of the issues that they have to deal with, that Jessica mentioned earlier, was that change in shelter. And that also means changing in camouflage. So where he can blend in with tree trunks and rocks and ground cover in the summer, he would stand out, very obvious in the winter. So he actually changes the color. They still have that little black tip. And you can see the vole in his mouth is a very fluffy rodent. So anybody who's active in the winter definitely needs this big, or inactive in the winter for that matter, this big fluffy coat. So that's definitely a strategy there. Changing their diet's another one. So we mentioned how the deer change their diet, and they migrate a little bit to accommodate that. The mountain goat changes his diet. Other animals will do that too, so different strategies. Jays are famous for being able to hide pine nuts and acorns and whatever other kind of seeds that they need to survive all winter. And they spend the summer and the fall hiding them in all these different places, and then they can come back all winter and find them. Individual nuts, just like poked into the ground. I couldn't find it again. I can barely find my keys half the time. But they've done studies on jays that are amazing spatial memory. So they can hide hundreds of thousands of seeds and still remember where each one is. Even after you've moved all the leaves off the trees, you've covered the place with 2 feet of snow, they can still find it. And they've done studies where it's literally they're triangulating the position based on these big landmarks. So there's a tree here, a rock here, and a fallen log here, and they'll be able to find all the seeds they've hidden. But if you move the tree and the rock, then they're lost. Right? So it's this crazy spatial context. A lot of the animals that might be more omnivorous in the summer, I mean, if there's going to be berries available, might as well take advantage of that. If there's more insects in the summer, you can take advantage of that. But in the winter, any plant life or insects are pretty much gone and not available. So they're going to strictly rely more on that predator instinct. So there's still going to be some little rodents running around. There's still going to be other animals, and that's going to be primarily what their diet consists of. Which is nice. There's food available, but it's a lean protein. You're not really going to fatten up on other animals. But we tend to see that changing in their diet, and you're also going to start seeing predators more in the daytime. So the night is long, it is cold. Anything that needs to run around is probably going to want to do it more in those daylight hours where it's a little warmer. So if your prey runs around during the daytime, that's when you're going to hunt it. So you tend to see more coyotes and foxes and bobcats and things like that in the daytime. Another version of storing the food is how a beaver survives. So a beaver builds a dam. I love that I have a pointer here. So they build a dam to create the pond. And the whole purpose of the pond is that it needs to be deep enough, not big enough, but deep enough that in the winter when it freezes, that ice doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. That there's enough free water that they can swim around. Because what they're going to do, tree branches that still have green leaves in the summer, put them in the pond and stick them in the mud at the bottom of the pond. And now you've just stuck them in the deep freeze all winter. So they can swim around in that pond water and still have green leaves to eat. And they're still going to come out, they're going to eat tree bark. So that layer just under the tree bark, not necessarily the heartwood, but that layer underneath where all the phloem and everything's going to happen, all the water and nutrients are slowly but surely going up and down the tree. That's going to be what they eat. But when they need a little diversity, they're going to go back to their stash in the pond. So the other thing that you don't necessarily get to see is this whole world under the snow. So I definitely recommend taking a walk through the snow. You have to layer up, right? But if you walk through a meadow in the winter that's covered in snow, what's under that snow is a bunch of dried grass, right? And there's going to be little pockets of air and space where the snow has pushed the grass down and it's bent over and made little like straw houses underneath it. So if you go walking through there, you're going to be able to hear the rustling of things going through that dry grass. And it's all these little critters, so even the rodents that are hibernating, they still wake up every now and then. Some of them have to run around and get more food. There's going to be some that just stay active, right? So they're going to tunnel through this subnivean zone. So sub meaning under, and nivean being the snow layer. So underneath the snow, there's all these tunnels running around. So I don't know if you guys can see it, because it's really hard to get pictures of tracks in the snow, especially on a PowerPoint. But there are these little tracks here that pop up and then dive back down under here, and you don't see them anywhere else. So that's somebody who is burrowing under the snow. They pop up, right? They're looking for something, some water or food, and then darting back down. So this little guy, whoever that is, whatever little mouse that was or vole, that's what these guys are hunting, right? So this is your classic fox pounce through the snow, right? Yeah, that's commitment to the hunt when you just go head first completely with that vertical alignment. So the fox is going to do it, the coyote is going to do it, bobcats do it. In fact, yeah, bobcat face plant, right? But that in that snowbank, he's got his 2 paws on some little critter. So coyote, there he is, mid-pounce. It's a classic stance. I love it. So they're listening. Like I said, if you walk through that meadow, you're going to be able to hear it because they're rustling through all the dry grass underneath that snow. So they're listening for those animals scurrying around and then targeted pounce. Forgot which one I'm pointing at. So this is another one. I'm glad there's shadows so you can see this one because it's awesome. So this is one where if you notice, no little tracks. There's no little tracks running around here, right? This is another predator that was listening for something running around under the snow and dove down on it. But in this case, it was an owl. So you can see the wing marks. I know, isn't that beautiful? So you know it's an owl as opposed to a hawk because owls, more than any other raptor, are going to rely on their hearing. Right? We hear the expression eagle eye for a reason. Eagles are visual hunters. Owls are going to be they have much more acute hearing. And that's going to be what they're using to target. And you know he was going after somebody under the snow because there's no little tracks. There's nothing that was running around there that he chased. So they'll come down, talons out, whoosh, and then he kind of hopped with it in his hands. His hands? Yeah. A little bit before he had a chance to fly off with it. So winter is a great opportunity to practice your tracks and studying animal interaction and realizing that there's still a lot of them running around out there despite the challenges of winter. Magic Man? I don't even know what's next. Okay, well, adopting. Do I have it right next? I think that was probably the next slide. Yes. So, despite what we presented as your winter challenges, the idea is that they do have their adaptations. They do have strategies. If it's too hard for them in the winter, they're probably going to leave town or sleep through it. Right? If they're sticking around, look at that. They have an adaptation to survive. Right? And if not, nature's going to take its course. Right? If there's a particular individual that is having a hard time in winter, there is going to be a coyote or a fox or somebody who's going to take care of his situation for him. Right? We don't want you to help them, is the point. So don't feed the wildlife, even in the winter. They've got something going on for them already. But other than that, we're done and we're open to questions. Ha!
I've been to a forum before. Anyway, so normally we ask for you to write them down, but that's only for somewhat debatable kinds of topics that are a little snarky. So don't do that because it's not a snarky topic. So just raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll come up. And if you feel like you need a microphone.
I just wondered about bird feeders. You said don't feed the wildlife.
Yeah. Good question.
So bird feeders are difficult because you are inadvertently feeding a lot of other animals, even if you are not necessarily intending to. So bird feeders are fine if it's just the birds and it's not like other animals that tend to get aggressive or dependent on it. But just know that if you live on the west side of Carson, a bear will come eat your bird seed. They will be very grateful for it. And that birds are very messy eaters and tend to knock that seed down a lot, and that attracts rodents, and anytime you have rodents, you are attracting other predators, such as bobcats and coyotes. So as long as you're okay with those things possibly coming into your yard, then bird feeders are fine.
Also, skunks and raccoons
Yes.
and things that are going to eat the birds that you're trying to feed, like big hawks or things like that. So bird feeders is one that I always laugh about because I yell at a lot of people in the office have bird feeders, and I keep yelling at them to not feed the wildlife. But it does change bird behavior too. So urban birds that used to migrate don't migrate because there's a lot of bird feeders, kind of a thing. So there's no policy against it. But it does have an impact, and it is inviting. You can't control who's going to eat that seed.
I want to know how you ever figured out it took 3 generations for a single butterfly from Pacific Grove to Nevada.
The way we figure anything out. So there's actually a whole project where you can tag a butterfly. So smallest collars in the world. Just kidding. It's actually a little tiny sticker that we stick on the underside of one of the wings. And it's got a color and a number on there, and we register that on the computer. So when people find that butterfly, because typically they really do just kind of lay down and die. And so people will find it, or they'll spot it if they're out. Just like with bird watchers, there's people that go out to watch the butterflies, and you can look at it and kind of get an idea. And they'll go online and look and call in and say, hey, we found your butterfly. So we can track the migrations that way, and then you can tag them again, and you just keep following where they started and where they end up, and the time span that goes with that. It's a lot of monitoring. A lot of the research is just trying to get out there and watch and observe over 20, 30, 40 years, and then, you know, we come to a conclusion.
I have a question up here. Hold on, I'm turning on the mic.
When you said that, like, the voles who burrowed down, like, and you said that their body temperature got so low when they were asleep and you couldn't wake them up, you also said that they had food, like, food stored up. Do they wake up and eat the food between different periods of time, or do they eat that when they wake up?
Yeah, so exactly. So they'll be in a deep sleep for a couple days at a time, and then every couple of days they wake up, they'll eat their food, they'll go to the bathroom, and then they'll go back to sleep.
Do bears in captivity change their routine? Do they have to hibernate or just skip it?
So it kind of depends on where they live and the temperatures there. So and what the caretakers want them to do. So at Animal Ark, outside of Reno, they still our bears still hibernate out there. So in nature, bears start getting ready for hibernation because the food becomes less available, so they get geared up and then they go into hibernation. So the way it works out there is the caretakers just kind of slowly start tapering off their food so the bears get the idea that it's time to go to sleep, and then they will. It's pretty interesting.
What do I have here? Hold
So I have a friend who lives behind Fremont School, and she has a really prolific apple tree. And every time I play tennis with her, she puts a couple bags of apples in the back of my car. They're not good for, they have lots of worms and they're small. What should I do with them? Because I don't see anything to do except drop them off somewhere so the deer eat them. Because, what do you want me to do with them?
So there's, in Reno, I don't know if they come to Carson, but there's a group called the Reno Gleaning Project. And if you have fruit trees that just has far too much fruit that you can't use, they will actually come remove it and then donate it to shelters for them to be able to use. So you can look into that as an option if they're more willing to put in the time to cut out the worms and the tiny apples. But I would not suggest just putting it out in a field for a deer. That's going to cause them to unnaturally congregate, and I mean, Carson already has quite the urban deer population, and we don't necessarily need to encourage that anymore.
The other option is that if you have trees and you suspect and expect the bears to come down and eat it, is you can kind of fortify the orchard. So beekeepers, anyone who has like an actual orchard or garden or things like that in an area, typically do some sort of fortification, whether that's like a hot wire fence in the fall or some sort of fencing or something along those lines that acts as a deterrent. That way you're not trying to dispose of the apples, but you can just keep the bears out of that area until they're gone and already composted into the ground, and then your tree can take those nutrients back up.
So I think I can say it without the mic. What are your thoughts about the urban deer we have now? I mean, there are families of deer that are multi-generational that don't ever leave town.
Right, and that's just, so it started years ago with the waterfall fire. They kind of got pushed down into this area, and they're like, wow, it's kind of great here. There's a lot of food, there's a lot of water, and it's just one of those things, these deer are not going away anytime soon. And most people in Carson are used to that, and they know how to interact with the deer, and they know, that they're going through the rut right now, and they're going to be getting crazy, like you were saying earlier. So they're here to stay when it comes to the deer. On the East Coast, some like white-tailed deer populations, they are having to get to some difficult management decisions because the populations are so high and they're causing so many car accidents, and we're not to that point here yet. But so for now, Carson's always going to be having deer. It's going to be something that people just need to learn how to live with them.
I have a follow-up question to that. We have a little bit of open space in the back of our house, and it's become a deer infirmary for the young males who get in fights. So we have, they come limping by, or there's somebody missing an antler. Is that going to draw predators who are after these injured deer?
So it certainly can, yes. It does happen, that predators will come and pick off the weakest member of the herd. It is possible, but still those predators don't tend to hang out. They don't want to be around the people. They don't want to deal with the cars. So if anything, they would take their deer and then move on. It hasn't proven to be an issue at this point.
Question. You said that the deer go along the side of the lake for the summertime. But, and then they come down into the valley. It looked like there were 3 lakes down there, or what are those lakes anyway?
It wasn't 3 lakes, it was 3 spots where the dots had gotten so thick together that they blurred into a big black spot. So it wasn't 3 lakes, it was 3 very specific winter habitat locations. Yeah. I honestly don't know. We will get back to that. I think we're going to have to give a special thanks to the Magic Man right there. Yeah.
Each one of these is just a very dense.
Yeah, because their populations where the dots are just getting so thick. So, what is that, Fly Mountain? I'm trying to find the physical spots here. So if we come down from Washoe, so we've got the city, and I want to say, this is Fly?
Anderson Reservoir.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, I apologize. Oh, wait, I don't know the geography enough to be able to find all this. I know this is Washoe. So you're coming down. It's not going to look like anything. To us, it's going to look like desert scrub.
It's Pyramid.
No, that's Washoe. This is, yeah. This is the city. This is Carson.
So that's all in Carson.
Yeah.
It look like the college and
It's just going to be, it's going to look like a big bench of sagebrush, bitterbrush. It's just desert scrub. It's not going to look like anything noteworthy the rest of the year. Right? And you got to understand that we love the sagebrush because it's what keeps them alive in the winter. Right? So it's critical habitat, and it looks just like desert scrub, but it's critical habitat for wildlife. In the summer, it's not their favorite food. So when given an option, they're going to go eat something else. But in the winter, it's the only food, and thus the best.
Back to bear hibernation. An authority on bears told me a couple of years ago that bears are not hibernating as much as they used to in Carson Valley. And what you explained, that they do wake up and wander, is that something that happens? Can you comment on that? Why they're appearing in the winter?
So humans are changing the way that bears hibernate. So the whole reason that hibernation evolved is because there was a lack of food. And with humans around and our garbage and our fruit trees and everything, there isn't necessarily a lack of food. So bears are not going into hibernation because they aren't forced into it anymore, essentially. If there's always food, then there's no reason to go into hibernation. So that is definitely one reason, and just mild winters. If there's a mild winter, they'll definitely come out and wander around. One of our biologists told me last year we had 4 bears with collars on them that never went into hibernation at all because it was such a mild winter. So definitely we are changing the way that bears hibernate.
So you said that the packing on weight for bears does not affect them like it does us.
Right.
But that's if they're eating apples and grasses, but has there been any studies to determine if they're hanging out at the McDonald's, eating that dumpster? Does that affect?
So part of the reason that we're not encouraged to eat out of McDonald's every day is because of that fat content, because of the diet and its effects on us. There's been nothing at all that indicates that the Oreo wrappers and cheeseburgers are having an effect on them other than changing their behavior. And that's dangerous because where the dumpster is behind McDonald's is the parking lot. Right? Where the garbage sources are usually in a parking lot or along the roadway because it needs to have access to that food truck, to the garbage truck. And part of the way that they're, honestly, most of the bears in Nevada that die each year are getting hit by cars, right? Because they're wandering through streets looking for garbage. So that's a big hazard to them, is getting that. But they can seriously pack on so much weight. That's why the black bear gallbladder is considered to be something that the black market sells, because that's one of those organs that's supposed to be affected and control your fat in your body. You tend to, get gallstones and stuff like that. And bears don't. They can literally eat the worst diet ever and get 3 times as big and be happy.
Okay, so you're saying that us leaving trash around the place is changing migration patterns and all that. But so why aren't we moving our dumps out to where they would normally go to change migration patterns there instead of here? Why are we trying to prevent them coming to us instead of us putting our food out there?
So it's not our dumps per se as much as our individual garbage that they're coming to. It's the household, it's what's around your house. So it's not necessarily that they're congregating at the landfill per se. And we don't want to use our garbage to attract them to the wild. There's food out there for them. It's just a matter of ease. 30 cheeseburgers is easier to find than 2 million termites on any given day. So it's the ease of which we provide the calories, which is also why an average wild black bear is 300 pounds, but the one that's been eating out of the campsite dumpster all summer is 600 pounds. Right? So it's pretty easy to tell who's eating wild food and who isn't when we do the physicals on the bears. But it's not intention. That's the biggest part, is it's an unintentional feeding of the wildlife. So that's why we do these forums and presentations, is to try and make it so that you're informed and we can control, we can secure our garbage, we can secure our orchards, our bird feeders, any unintentional feeding of the wildlife, we can help curb that so that they do go back to more natural sources.
Would you talk about skunks and raccoons and their preferred habitat and eating?
Sure.
So both skunks and raccoons tend to prefer riparian areas, so they like to be along waterways. So they never venture too far from water in one source or another. They are both omnivores, which means that they will eat just about anything, including human sources of food. So they'll eat anything from rodents to vegetables and fruit, to carrion, anything that's already died. They'll eat seeds. So both of them are probably some of the most well-adapted urban animals out there. Especially raccoons can use sewers as travel ways and sources of water, so they can live in really the most urban parts. But like any animal, if you don't want them around, you just have to remove access to food, water, and shelter, and they'll typically go find somewhere else that they can find it. So that just means securing your garbage. If you have fruit trees, removing all of that excess fruit, making sure they don't have lots of places to hide. I get lots of calls about skunks and raccoons underneath decks or underneath sheds, so make sure that they don't have anywhere in your yard that they can hide out.
And nocturnal mostly?
Yeah, both of them will tend to be nocturnal for sure. And they love cat food and dog food and will come inside through dog doors. Just a heads up.
Do the deer mice up here have hantavirus? I get deer mice in the house.
They can. I don't know stats on them.
Yeah, I don't know the prevalence of it or the reports enough to know that I don't know. So it can't be too bad, to be honest. I know that it is a concern, and that if you are picking up mouse droppings, we do recommend that you spray it with some water or something so that it doesn't become airborne and dusty, if that makes sense. But, you know, Swiffer mops work great for that kind of thing.
Wear a mask.
But enough that if we don't know enough about it, it probably isn't a very prevalent issue here.
What do rabbits do in the winter?
So rabbits are still going to be active. They have a very distinctive track if you go and look for them. They're 2 big feet and like 2 little feet in a row in front, and they're going to be running around. That's what the diving behavior is going after as well. So they're going to run around on top of the snow. They'll burrow down underneath. So they have little ground burrows that are nicely. Snow's a great insulator. You guys all made the snow houses when you were a kid, right? They're these great little insulators. The igloos are a thing for a reason. So they're under there, cushioned in that grass under the snow, and then they'll pop out and run around. But there's going to be enough of that, you know, the plants and the seeds, things like that, that they're still going to eat. And occasionally, they're going to become predators themselves. So as much as we say anything's an herbivore or a carnivore, there's always that exception depending on, you know, just how bad they're craving something.
What about the cougars sightings that have been happening in Carson City? I've been thinking about for 20 years, and I've never heard so many people reporting cougar sightings inside the urban area of Carson.
So it was more of one really visible set of cougars that were all over the place for a couple of weeks. So I was probably getting calls on them for 2 weeks, and we think it was a mom and a kitten, probably. And they didn't cause any trouble, really. They killed a couple deer and were moving through the area, but have since left, like mountain lions tend to do. They really don't like to hang out in one place for very long, so they kind of cruise through and were on their way after a couple of weeks.
So a mountain lion will have a huge territory, like 100,000 square miles. I mean, it's a huge territory. And they don't have a den they go to every night. So they're going to be on the hunt until they make a kill. They stop long enough to eat it, and then they're moving again. So they don't tend to stay too long in one area. And they tend to be fairly solitary. So if you see more than one, it's usually a mom. She keeps the kittens with her for almost 2 years. So they'll be full grown, but still hanging out with mom, not quite ready to leave the nest yet, so to speak. But that's usually the only time you see them together, because they are a large animal. It takes a lot of food to sustain them, so they're just always on the move. You can't stay in one area too long. They run out of food very fast. So typically, if you see one, you're not going to see it for too much longer after that.
There were some rare sightings where camera took pictures of them before. What were those animals? They're showing up that hadn't been around for 100 years.
Wolverines.
Oh, the wolverines, yeah. In Truckee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Highway 89.
Yeah. Somebody's camera got pictures?
Where did they come from? Where did they come back?
So, if it is what I think you're talking about, it was a couple years ago, and there was just one sighting of a wolverine on like a California game camera. We don't really know. I haven't heard much about him since. I don't think he's been sighted again.
Yeah, we haven't gotten a lot of calls, and it was just a solitary. There wasn't, so I don't know where it came from.
We're definitely historic habitat for them, so at some point they're bound to pop up again. Yes, in the back.
I got told, is it true that raccoons actually wash their food or like rinse their food or something before they eat it?
So it appears that way. So raccoons have pretty similar hands to humans. They almost have like an opposable thumb, and they've got pads on their hands that are really super sensitive. And they don't have super great eyesight. It's solidly okay. But they will appear to be washing their food because they get the water and it helps make the pads of their hands a lot more sensitive, and then they will rub that on the outside of their food to find out what part of it is actually edible. So their scientific name is Procyon loader, and that means dog-like washer. That's how they got that.
Good fact checking.
Am I the only person who's seen a weasel recently? Have you guys ever seen So I thought it was I saw it the first time in 30 years, and it was running through the brush, and I ended up being able to catch it in a wild cat because I thought it was somebody's ferret. It looked like a ferret. And then when I saw it snarling and wanting to call my face off, I realized it probably was not somebody's cat. But I mean, are they not real nocturnal or something? Is that why we don't see them during
Well,
the
they're
day?
certainly sneaky, right? We call people weasels for a reason. They're small, they're close to the ground. They are going to be more nocturnal. They're definitely going to be active at night, but not exclusively. So there's always that. You can easily see nocturnal animals during the day. I've seen it often enough. Deer are considered nocturnal. We definitely see those during the day. I've seen the raccoons during the day. So it does happen, just like we stay up at night, kind of thing. But they're just running around in the underbrush probably a lot more than open ground. So you probably just don't see them as much as because they're going after other things running around in the underbrush.
I understand they can take out like a rabbit that's twice their size.
A rabbit, yes, definitely. The rabbit, the bulls, chipmunks, squirrels. Weasel family is just famous for being incredibly aggressive and going after things definitely bigger than them, just out of sheer force and will, I think. But we see like mink they look like ferrets. They're bigger than a weasel. Weasels are actually very small. Mink live along rivers and streams and things like that, and they're going after muskrats, which are the same size as them. They'll go after ducks, which are much bigger than them. They'll definitely go after your chickens, so watch out for that. But yeah, they'll go after a rabbit 3 times its size, easily.
So we release them like way far away.
I have another question, and something Jessica said reminded me of it. So we now, wolves have been observed in Oregon, I think Northern California, and definitely Idaho. Is there historic wolf habitat in Nevada, and is there a chance that they might come back to it?
So, yes, some historic wolf habitat, but not a lot of it. And we've had one confirmed sighting of a wolf in Nevada in northern Washoe County. But really, for the most part, we don't have the habitat that wolves need. We don't have enough, animals for them to be able to hunt. So really, that wolf kind of came in, probably looked around and was like, ew, no, and then moved on its way back to California. So it is possible, they're in Idaho, and, Jarbidge, the northern part of the state, is backing up right up to it. And so it is possible that we could have some up there at some point in time, but at this point we don't have an established pack. We don't have a large number. They just kind of cruise through on occasion and then continue on their way.
I see antelope up there, but I don't see antelope around here. Where do you find antelope in Nevada?
So they are actually all over. What they're going to want is big, open, flat space. So not necessarily running up and down the hills the way sheep or deer might. They like that because their main strategy is to outrun anything that's after them and to be able to see anything coming after them from a distance. So because of that, they're going to want that wide open space. But we see them wherever you get that big open valley and you've got the highway cruising through, you're going to spot them. They just wander around as a herd. They're going to keep moving around. I was trying to think of the last time I've seen them. I've seen them north of Reno, up through Pyramid, not Pyramid,
I've seen them at
Springs,
Pyramid,
like on the way towards Pyramid Lake or further north. I've seen them down along the East Walker. So they definitely get around. They're up and down 95, like if you're going to Vegas, you'll see them on either side on occasion. There's a whole bunch of them out in the Carlin area. They definitely have established herds around.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I got a challenge question for you.
So we have fish, and we had 6 good-sized fish, and we came down one morning, and one fish was out of the pond, and its face was eaten off. Nothing else, no other damage. It was dead.
Sure.
But its face was eaten off. You want to guess what it was?
A raccoon.
Nope. Because we saw it later, and Carl Lackey came out and said, this is what it was.
I mean, it could be anything. It could be a bear or
To eat just the face? I mean, why wouldn't bear? The bear, I think, came that night and ate the whole
rest of
it. No blood, nothing.
grapefruit bear?
Oh, could have been, but no. Nope. One more guess.
Was it a
We
bird?
talked about him tonight. No, it was a mink. And then later in the day, I see it running down the stream bed, jumped in the pond, and it grabbed this other fish by its nose and started swimming backwards.
Yeah.
Which
It kind of jerks about
I
it.
didn't know we had mink.
Yeah.
I was shocked. So, hey, I stumped him. That's great.
Oh yeah.
So when yesterday.
Bobcats definitely, especially on the, like, near Winnie Lane and even Carson, we get quite a few in that area, in that neighborhood as well. For sure. The side closest to the mountains, the west side.
So coyotes and bobcats, if you go back out in the lobby, we have a pelted each. And if you hold them up, they are the exact same size. So most people think one's bigger than the other or something like that. They really are the same size. They're going after the same sort of food. They have slightly different adaptations that makes one more competitive in the desert and open areas, and one's more competitive along the mountains and the foothills. So there is going to be an area where they overlap, and that typically is like the Reno, Carson kind of area, this little band. But as you go further out towards the desert, it's going to be a lot more coyotes. As you get further towards the mountains, it's going to be more bobcats. Just because they can actually eat each other.
Deer eat sage. I've never seen a sage cleaned off like somebody made a meal on it.
They get, because they forage, they're browsing, they're not necessarily going to stay and pick that one clean. That's not necessarily their style. Plants that do that, that's typically an insect that's stayed on that one plant and eaten the whole thing. Or it's a smaller grass or something like that where an animal's sitting there picking the whole stalk off. But when you have all this brush, they're literally foraging.